Hi there. Welcome to the Sober Circle channel. Enjoy this speaker tape.
I was deeply moved and deeply touched. Not too long thereafter, he spoke at the Brazos Riverside Conference, and I had an opportunity to get to know him better because that weekend we walked and we talked and we visited and we became friends, and I had grown to love this man. I've heard him talk 6 or 7 times. Dick has a quality of sobriety and honesty that we all wish we had. He has a story and a message that's always fresh and new. As many times as I've heard him, his story is always different because I always say about Dick that you know exactly where he is that day when you hear him talk, because he's topical and current and absolutely one of the finest men you'll ever meet. I have the privilege of here in the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. So I hope that you'll cinch up the girth on your saddle real tight tonight and grab a good hold, because you're in for one of those rare AA treats. Let's give a big welcome to Dick G. from Danville, Colorado.
Jared, do I owe him money? My name is Dick Grant, and I am a real alcoholic. I'm a pure alcoholic too. I'm a throwback. They kind of keep me around. I'm kind of like Arbutus. I'm one of those few that got here on alcohol alone, and they keep me around for comedic interest, I think, or something. But I am really glad to be here. I really have spoken way too many times in Texas, and I don't know. Just the depth of your illness causes you to keep asking me back. But not a hell of a lot of hope for Texas, I'll tell you. But I must always say that I feel spiritually more at home in Texas than I do anywhere in the United States, and I say that because of the quality of the relationships that I've been allowed to establish with people like Massey and Jared and all of you others with whom I've spent a significant amount of time and a significant amount of sharing. So I say that with all candor. This is my spiritual home, and so I'm always glad to be here. I've always believed that there is no separate program between AA and Al-Anon. I think we're just all part of a whole. In fact, if you'll read the history of Alcoholics Anonymous, you'll find that in the early days, there are a few things that are said around AA these days that are really damn lies. And one of them is that the Al-Anon program is separate. Well, for the early years, what they did was they met in Henrietta Seiberling's house, and the first thing they would do, and this is going to take care of the spiritual part of the program, what's referred to as the spiritual part of the program. When they would get a newcomer, they would bring the wife and the husband in, and there would be one who'd look okay, and then there'd be one who's nervous and shaking, and that was the Al-Anon. And they'd take the alcoholic upstairs, and they would say, "Are you willing to get down on your knees and ask God to help you?" That's how they were introducing people into AA in the early days, and it worked. So that kind of takes care of the thing about the spiritual part of the program. And the other thing is that they met together as families, and they tried to work out the thing together as families. And Arbutus is very thorough and very lovely presentation tonight. Proved, that we're all part of one whole. We're not separate. I don't remember hearing alcoholism described better than that. And so I'm not going to try, I may be a little rash, but I'm not going to, if you can't, we're just going to talk about my humility for about 45 minutes. Only a fool greater than I would try to top that. So, and that's really a fool. I've always deeply believed that there's no real difference between AAs and Al-Anons. That Al-Anons are just really potential alcoholics who couldn't cut it. You heard where she quit there in the middle, didn't you? I mean, the drinking was just getting good, and she quit. See? Yeah. They didn't have that higher vision of drinking that some of us have. You know, that will allow you to go through jail and degradation and all those things in order to hang in there having fun. You know? I've always had a higher vision of drinking anyway. I've always thought that there was something mysterious and gorgeous to it. Somewhere I picked that up. Now I should not have had that because I happen to have been blessed with two alcoholic parents and who were periodic binge drinkers, and that's called every once in a while getting down to basics. You know, like I just wish they'd dress when they walked around the house during those times, stuff like that. Beverly, we have a terminal Al-Anon here in the front row. Would you come up and get it? She just released her Coke with love. Anyway, every once in a while I'd come home from school and they'd be in the middle of one, and we'd have what I referred to as the ballet of the flashing knives, and we'd chase each other around the house and trade parts in a script that was just kind of got monotonous toward the end, and that covers my youth. But despite that, I've always had a higher vision of drinking. I've always thought that there was a really classy sort of, you know, just marvelous way to drink, and the reason I knew that was that, and I once ran into a young lady who was sitting in the tavern one afternoon who really helped me visualize that. And this will help you to understand my dilemma over drinking. I've always had mixed emotions about drinking. I really have. I've always just really wanted to drink. But I've never wanted what drinking did, and that creates tension in a person, and some confusion, I might add. There's some irreconcilable issues in all that just create a lot of uncertainty in a young man like me, who is sensitive and misunderstood anyway. But I met this one young lady one time, and I thought that on the basis of my purchasing a beverage for her that we might strike up a meaningful relationship. This was, I had a better chance this particular, it happened to be during the day, and I had a better chance because normally at this point in my trying to approach ladies, I'd already thrown up, and it was always hard to get something going after that. But and I always had a mild problem with the urinary tract too when I was drinking, and but this time I thought I had it all together because it was afternoon and none of that had happened yet, and I sidled up to this lady, and I offered to buy her a beer, which I thought was a rather refreshing drink of a hot afternoon. And she said, well, no, she said, I don't drink beer. I thought, well, did it again. You know, I had a little sense of inadequacy anyway. And my sponsor later told me it was because I'm inadequate. Anyway, I said, well, what would you like? And she said, well, I'd really like a Courvoisier, please. And I thought, it sounds pretty nice. I had no idea what in the world a Courvoisier was. I later found out that it was a brandy, but I said, well, why is that you drink that instead of beer? And she said, well, when I take a snifter with a Courvoisier in it, and I hold it up to the light, and I roll it around, and I see the light refracting through it in that golden tone in there. And I close my eyes, and I visualize myself in this South Sea Island setting. And the golden beads remind me as I'm rising out of the water of this warm lagoon, and the sun is glinting off the diamond-like droplets on my bronze body. And the smell of the Courvoisier reminds me of the tropical plants wafting through the air. And I hear them sloshing in there, and I think of the waterfall that's coming down, and she said, and besides, when I drink beer, I fart. There's a lot of confusion in drinking for me, and I never was able to reconcile those seemingly divergent goals and that was coming out of it. I decided, though, that the way you don't have a problem as a drinker is that you overpay for what you're drinking. So I hung around the nicest upholstered sewer in a large part of the United States, and I would drink things like Courvoisier and Glenlivet and occasionally buy myself a sham. I never bought booze for other people. I thought that was terribly inefficient. But I would drink that kind of stuff, and I used to sit home of an evening toward the end there and drink expensive port wine from a silver cup that I was particularly fond of. And you don't have a problem when you drink like that. And you may be you may be posted at the club for not paying, but you don't have a problem. But you belong to the club, and that's what matters, right? Because if you belong to the club, then it's okay, because then you're doing all right. Because by their rules, you're okay. It's all right. And I would discuss my education, and I would go through life talking about the things that I wanted to talk about, and it seemed like I was the only one. People seem to always want to talk about my performance, and I always wanted to talk about my potential. And there was neither of either. You notice we don't say neither of either. We do it right, because we're a little cut above, and we're a little special, and we're sort of the undiscovered Illuminati, is what I was saying. But from time to time, I'd get unlucky. And this massive intellect, this turning point in human intellectual development would be in jail. And it didn't make sense. I remember one evening I was an officer and a gentleman, and by act of Congress, which is what it took. And I was at a cocktail party in Coronado, and I was, I'd just been promoted at they call them wedding down parties. I don't know why they call them wedding down parties, because I was soaked by when I got there every time. But here I was now a lieutenant in the Navy, which is like a captain in the Army. And I was an officer and a gentleman. I was a leader of men. And I was developing the social graces. And I was on the roof of the house because husband of a lady that I'd been seeing found me at the party, and then he was circling the house while I was trying to find a tree that I could jump into to get away. And I thought to myself, this is not the way they do it in the Lord Calvert ads, you know. Another time we were at a full dress thing in our, Navy has terrible uniforms, dress uniforms for officers. God, they're uncomfortable and they're awkward. And you have that dumb sword on, you know. And I was crawling around the floor of the officers' club, biting women on the ankle, doing a sup hose check. And people thought that was untoward behavior. I remember once there was a gorgeous creature at a cocktail party, and this Coronado, the Hotel del Coronado, and it was just gorgeous, and it was just my kind of thing. It was drinking in that higher vision, and she was sitting on a windowsill on the third floor, and then this beautiful cocktail party. I went over to kind of lay a little charm on her, and I missed, and I went out the window. I never met her again, either. I lived for 3.5 years in Coronado, California, and I left my mark. I was the only guy that, whenever anybody on Saturday morning would see my car, they'd call the house to tell me where it was, because I was such a pathetic sight walking the streets every Saturday morning looking for my car. Last summer we took our children to San Diego on vacation. And, I was telling my kids, I said, it's not every kid in the world gets to go by the house where their father can show him where he tried to commit suicide twice. Because that's the reality of it. That was the reality of it. The reality was that I had 2 unsuccessful suicide attempts in the middle of all that. Because the higher view doesn't work. And there isn't a higher view of drinking for an alcoholic. There's just a continuing process of constantly lowering your standards in order to fit what you're doing. That's all it is. It's just a slow process of degradation where you're continually redefining what's acceptable in order to meet your current level of behavior. And that's what I did. I came into the program of Alcoholics Anonymous when I was 30 years old. I started drinking when I was 15. And it wasn't until the last time I got drunk that I accepted responsibility for being drunk. My last drunk, I took the responsibility for being drunk, and that was my last drunk. I think maybe that has something to do with the recovery from alcoholism, is taking the responsibility for being drunk. I'd done one other thing, which I didn't know it at the time, but I'd paid my dues. They say Alcoholics Anonymous is the most expensive club in the world to get into, and it would be hard to imagine spending more money on anything else than what I did over those 15 years. But I paid my dues, and I think we all pay our dues, whether it's an AA or Al-Anon, at one point, usually before we get here. And that is that I said the price of admission, the 3 words that get us in here, which is God help me, because that's the only way that I ever quit drinking. The moment that I acted like, despite not understanding, that there was a God who could involve himself in my drinking, from that moment on, my drinking went away. I believe that we have a spiritual solution to a spiritual problem. I don't believe that we are here to fix your marriage, to fix your job, to fix your education, to fix your bank account. I think we're here to apply a spiritual solution to a spiritual problem, which is the disease of or the disease of reacting to alcoholism. As a child of an alcoholic, of two alcoholic parents, who were the hardest kind of alcoholic parents to ever understand because they were really bright, interesting, nice people most of the time. I wondered why I went so crazy during those years as a kid. And I finally figured it out. I think the way we drive those around us crazy as alcoholics is that they spend all that time and energy trying to apply logic to an illogical situation. And I did that as a young person growing up. And I also recovered from the disease of alcoholism because I quit applying logic to an illogical disease. I threw logic out the window in this great intellect, and I simply said 3 illogical words. God helped me. And to me they were illogical because, number one, I'd proven back in college there was no God. Help is for the morally and intellectually defective, and me was too special and unique to have a problem. So you see, when I said God help me, it was a totally illogical statement on my part. I didn't even believe it. But it worked. God's always been there. I just never understood that. And I continue from time to time to wonder where He is. Where was God when I was a 22 or 23-year-old young man, stuffing rags in the windows and doorways of an apartment in Coronado and turning on the gas? And I asked myself, there's no God. What's the point? What's the use? The hell with it. And so I turned on the gas and I laid down and I went to sleep. Except when I woke up a few hours later with a house full of gas, I was still alive. And that's not supposed to happen. Where was God when I was laying on that bed with that knife stuck in my chest and I was crying because I didn't have the guts to shove it in? Where was God? Isn't it funny? Some instinct kept me from shoving it in. I believe that God is in our instincts for self-survival, for dignity, for creativity, and for making some kind of a positive contribution to this world. I'm currently sponsoring a fellow who has 15 years sobriety. Oh yeah, you're supposed to do that down here, aren't you? Yeah, I used to wonder why you always give your sobriety date in Texas, and then I remembered it's because you can't trust each other. It is by the grace of God and the program of Alcoholics Anonymous that I have not found it necessary to take a drink or anything else mood-altering since February 16th of 1969. And I'm sobering a fellow. I'm sponsoring a fellow. No, I have no confusion over that issue. God sobers people up, not my cleverness. But I'm working with a fellow who's got 15 years sober, who's just gone through his 3rd marriage in sobriety, and who is asking me every day when I talk to him, "Where's God? Where's God?" And he called me a couple nights ago. He called me, and he's in the hospital now, and he has phlebitis, and he has clotting, and he's a fire chief of a fire department. And they're going to have to put him on Coumadin, which means that he's going to have to lose his job, too. And he's asking me, "Where's God?" I don't know where he is in that process tonight, except he's safe in the hospital while I'm away. But he gave me a book to read the other night, and it's poems by about Vietnam, the Vietnam War, by a Vietnam War that, and the name of the book is Johnny's Song, and I've forgotten the fellow's name who wrote it. But there's a line in there, and he says that every time I try to apply my reason to my instincts, my reason is like a chimpanzee riding on the back of a runaway mastodon called my instincts. Where was God during those years? I believe He was in my instincts. I believe that I fundamentally had a desire which was more compelling than the desire to die. That I wanted to live, and that I wanted to matter. And that I wanted to love somebody. I didn't want to be loved. You know that? I really didn't want to be loved during those years. I really just wanted to have somebody to love. I remember old Chuck C. saying that one of the biggest lies that the world teaches us is that our needs are to be needed and to be loved. And his opinion was, which I agree with, is that our two greatest needs are to love and to do. Where was God during all that time? I think He was in my instincts because that was all that was left. I had reduced myself through the use of alcohol and through my own personal form of insanity to the level that only my instincts were capable of working at that point. Now, I was 30 years of age when I came into Alcoholics Anonymous. I had never lost a job over alcohol. I didn't have any bad checks outstanding. My wife, to the testimony of her illness, was still with me. I had just been promoted by a large corporation. So if any of you have had that happen recently and you're new, all that does testify for you, in your case and mine, is that large corporations are very mediocre in their choice of people. And yet, the only thing that was keeping me alive was God working through my instincts. My sheer instinct of self-survival and to matter. Somehow I wanted to matter. I was living in Santa Barbara, California, and I was driving up and down the coast on business, and I would drive by the Camarillo State Hospital for the Insane, which is the Southern California version of the Laughing Academy, and I would wish that I could go turn myself in there because it looked like a safe place to live. That looked like a pretty good deal to me at that point. With all those external things going on in my life, which the world says I'm doing all right. To me, the best option in life was to go turn myself in and have somebody else take care of me for the rest of my life. That was a good deal to me at that time. Because I was just tired. I was just tired. I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, and I did it about as badly as you can and not drink. I brought in here an exaggerated sense of uniqueness, which did not allow me to function like the rest of you. I just had to fight that uniqueness thing down to the last bitter, painful moment. So I would come to meetings late and leave early, hide out during the coffee break in the parking lot of the men's room, and drive home and curse you people for not helping me. And of course, anytime you were able to catch my eye and say, "Hello, how are you?" I would say, "Fine." And then drive home and curse you because you weren't helping me. Where was God during those days? I believe that God was in the people who had come before me, the Bills and Arbutuses and all those people to whom we owe this legacy, who kept it going before we got here. I believe God was in those rooms when I would have a feeling in an AA meeting I wouldn't have anywhere else. There was a magic or something that happened in that thing that I would feel. It was a tangible, real thing that I would sense in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. As angry and bitter as I was, There was something there that was happening that was greater than me, and I couldn't explain it, except that I knew that it was working for you all. Which probably meant that it was intended only for the average. Because again, I wasn't average. I was clever, bright, and interesting. Thank you. God was in my wife's life because after I'd been sober a year working this great program that I just described, I went on a particularly advanced dry drunk, and I got a message from the God who doesn't exist in a movie, and went home and told her I was leaving her. And she had been hanging out in those meetings that Arbutus described, and she didn't react right. She did it all wrong. She was supposed to get upset and cry and beg me not to go and all that kind of stuff, you know. Instead, she did that most cruel of all things, which is that she released with love. But she also instinctively knew the difference too, and so she often says, you know, release is not abandonment. She didn't abandon me, but she released me. And God was in the fact that she had a sponsor for 6 months that she never met. And God was there the night when I went to a stag meeting in Beverly Hills one Wednesday night, and I walked in, and the guys had all been out to dinner together because it was that kind of group. And they were laughing and joking and hugging, and their lives were, you know, totally entwined with one another's. And there I sat in the back. And I got up and walked out before the meeting ever started, and I started across a dark park. And I stopped, and I asked myself, where am I going? And I knew where I was going. I was going to get drunk. And I began to imagine what was going to be like when I got drunk. And the funny thing happened was I could smell the bars. And I could smell me the next morning. And I could smell the funny folks that I used to wake up with in the morning. I was one of those alcoholics that used to come to. I never woke up. I came to. Would look at the ceiling and say, please, God, let me be alone. That's my sex inventory in a nutshell. Seemed to be an inexhaustible supply of kinky ladies in wherever I was. God was there that night when I could smell that, and I went back in the meeting. God was there when I was one out of 12 guys chosen out of a group of 50 to speak that night at random. God was there in a man who walked up to me afterwards and knew enough about alcoholics not to ask me if I wanted help. He informed me what time he would pick me up the next morning or next evening for a meeting. Would I please write down my address and phone number? That's how I got my first sponsor. He said, we're going to a meeting tomorrow night. Write down your address and phone number. I'll pick you up. That's where God was. And I didn't even see it. I was so caught up with me that I couldn't even see miracles. Now that's a testimonial to sickness. You know that? You got to really be sick to have miracles happen, and you don't see them because you're so busy thinking about yourself. God was in a sponsor that I had soon after that because my first sponsor got drunk. And then that's when I found out I really had to go find him for my own. Because now the pedestal was empty. And now I had to have help right now. because I've been sober a couple years, and I've just been promoted again because I'm in AA. I got 3 promotions from that company because I was a recovered alcoholic. They used to send me to all the places where they had to fire the alcoholics. Who better, right? God was in the mind of the man that I met when I got transferred to Seattle, who knew enough about alcoholics to tell me the words that saved my life and turned my whole program around. And that was, Dick, your problem is the hum of your self-awareness is so loud in your ears that you're not going to hear the message around here. That's where God was. So where's God now? I notice on your wall outside that you have the promises. And I'm here to tell you that those promises come true. And they come true faster than you probably will expect them to come true. But I want to tell you something else. They aren't the only thing that happen. Sometimes we sell the promises to the newcomers in AA as though that's what life is going to be completely like. And it has not been my experience or those around me that although those promises come true, that there aren't also some other realities of life which cause us to stay teachable. I call them failure, and God calls them humility. I'd like to just share a couple of those tonight. We'll get out of here. I was many years sober when I realized one day that what I was trying to do with my life was I was trying to prove to the old man that he was wrong about me the whole time. Now, I had a father who was the kind of guy that everybody loved. He was dynamic. He was articulate. He was the president or the chairman of everything. He was the vice president of the big steel company and the president of the country club, and he and his buddies even started their own athletic club. Athletic club. We know what sport was going on down there. I remember once moving from a town, and we lived at a bungalow at the club, and my mother informed me that was the same bungalow my father used to shack up in. When you're 10 years old, that's a little hard to understand. But I realized that what I was trying to do is I was trying to outdo the old man. Because somewhere along the line, and I don't remember where it was, except I remember an incident once when the first time he asked me to mow the lawn when I was a kid and I had left some strips. And I remember him standing out there explaining to me the deficiencies in my approach to things. And I think it was somewhere along there that I got a message communicated to me, either directly or indirectly, that no matter how hard I tried, I was never going to measure up. And I found that well into sobriety, I was trying to prove that he was wrong. That I was going to be that dynamic, charismatic, loving, sweet, charming, lovable, mover and shaker, man of industry, leader of men, father of grateful children, husband of fawning wife, and it was a no-fail deal because I'd been so sober so long that God owed me. Well, I've been sober 18 years by the grace of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, and there are a couple of things that I know absolutely certain. Number one, that God loves me. Number two, that I love Him. And number three is that beyond that, I have no idea what's going to happen in my life. Let's start with the dynamic leader of the captain of industry. Last November, I looked around and realized that I was the only one who didn't realize that my business was broke. And so we held a conference in the family, or actually they had one of their conferences. My family isn't all well yet because they still hold conferences without me. And somehow think they're going to arrive at the proper conclusion without the benefit of my input. They informed me that this time we don't do any more startup deals. This time, Dad, we get a real job. Which, of course, stifles my creativity. It's like regular hours. That's for the average. Going to squelch my spirit. So I now live in the San Francisco area because I had to get a real job, and I got angry because I figured God owed me. Where was God when my business went broke? And I honestly was trying to earn a living, to be of service to other people. I was trying to do it according to the principles of the program of AA, and I believe to the best of my ability that I ran my business according to the principles of AA. And it went broke. So where's God? We rendezvoused, he and I, the day I left Denver to drive out to San Francisco to start the new job, and which came, by the way, I put together the most Jim Dandy job search program that anybody has ever put together, which availed me not. And then a guy that I never would have thought of called me in a clear blue sky and offered me the job, which is, you understand that process, don't you? But you're not supposed to be out of work at 18 years of sobriety. So as I left that day, and I left my family, and I was driving to San Francisco, and I drove out, I started screaming at him about the Denver city line. And I settled into just sort of steady cursing long about Keystone and Vail. I was crying well past Glenwood Springs, mostly in self-pity. But long about Grand Junction, something happened. A phrase came into my mind. And it was the most difficult thing to ignore because it's a line that I used on a guy I sponsored. I had just gone over to the apartment of a fellow who had been vice president of the biggest trust company in Denver and who was just newly sober. And he, in the course of my being there, he got a call from his creditors, and they were hounding him to pay his bills. And he was devastated because he knew that I knew what the phone call was about, right? And he hung up the phone, he looked at me, and there were tears in my eyes, and I said to him, "Can you thank God for that?" And about Grand Junction, I remembered that. And so I started out with one of my very spiritual prayers. I said, "All right, God damn it. I don't want to, and it doesn't make any sense, but thank you." By Elko, Nevada, I was crying for a different reason. Because my friend came home again and he was in the car with me. And he and I finished a ride on in. my friend and I. And he was in the car, and I was crying, and I was singing. And I kept hearing an old song that said, "It is well with my soul." And over and over and over again, it is well with my soul. And I'm here tonight to tell you that it is well with my soul. I find that God is not really interested in the slightest with my resume or my bank account. He is keenly interested in my being continually teachable. Because something that I've said many times from the podium, I have to live with now. And that is, the purpose of my sobriety is not to acquire and consume. The purpose of my sobriety is to try to be useful to God and my fellow man. One of the things that I thought that comes with long-term sobriety was that you were going to have immunity from the problems that those of you who didn't have quite the handle on life that I have seem to suffer from a great deal. Now, this is another form of terminal illness, and it's called teenage children. I'm not sure if it's terminal for her or for me. I am trying to apply logic to an illogical situation. And I'm going a little nuts over it. Jay and I, my wife Jay, who's a really good Al-Anon. I am married to a real Al-Anon. She works the Al-Anon program. She goes to meetings. She teaches 12-step groups from the big book. And she has not killed me. I'm glad Arbutus said that tonight. I just remembered she's never laid a finger on me. Which puts her about 4 years ahead of Mother Teresa. But it's interesting that our mutual diseases cause us, when we have a teenage daughter who's going through a terribly difficult readjustment as a 15-and-a-half-year-old girl, adjusting from a small town in Colorado to life in the fast lane in the San Francisco area, where the drugs and alcohol apparently are almost pervasive. And there are a lot of sick instructors and a lot of sick stuff going on around them. And she's having trouble adjusting to that. And of course, in my beautifully spiritual 18-year sobriety way, I decided I'd discipline her out of it. Because I am so frightened that she's going to go through what I went through, that I do the very worst possible thing in dealing with it, which is I become angry. And so Jay becomes angry, and I become angry, and not having anywhere to turn with our fear and our frustration, we begin to devour each other. And we turn it on each other. Fortunately, I'm married to an Al-Anon who the other night stood there and listened to my nonsense and sat through it until the look on her face reminded me that I was crazy. That a dry drunk is when you're the only person on earth who's right. And that there is a higher path to walk. Where's God with my daughter? I guess he and she are right on schedule. I guess. It's not my schedule. I wish it were. It hurts. But apparently he doesn't have any grandchildren. I could stay sober 4 millenniums and she's still going to be on her schedule. So if you got a little time in your prayers, you could work the Grant family in. Simply because, not that any particular thing should happen, except that maybe Mr. and Mrs. Grant will remember that by the grace of God and the fellowships of Al-Anon and Alcoholics Anonymous, it is well with our soul, as it is with all of us. So where's God? He's in your eyes. He's in the dignity that you're creating out of the way you're living. He's in the dignity that you created in your suffering. And He is in the bright and certain hope that if we trust God, clean house, it is well with our soul. Thank you.